Welcome to MeatsPad, a platform dedicated to sharing breakthrough knowledge that is accessible to the meats industry. On each episode, we will hear from meat specialists and professionals to talk about numerous topics in meat science, including animal welfare, meat production, meat quality, food safety, and so much more.
Hello, meat folks. Welcome back to the MeatsPad podcast. Today, I feel honored. I feel very, very happy because today we have with us Dr. Joe Michael Gonzalez, who was the first ever interviewee that we had on the podcast. How are you, Dr. Gonzalez?
Good. How are you? It's good to be back, and I was thinking about that today, thinking that I'm going up one on everybody else that's been giving interviews. So hopefully, I can always be the first one and be the first one to 3 and then 4 and stuff like that. So I appreciate you asking me back, and I do, and I would tell you, listening back on it, and I do listen to your podcast when I'm working in the lab, and I'm very proud of what you and Phil have done. You have done a great job with this, and I remember you asking me, should I do it? And I'm like, it's COVID, why not do it? And so I'm happy to see that this is blown up for you, and it's one of your passions now. So good job. I appreciate you letting me be number 1 and number 20 now, or whatever I am.
Yeah, I think this is going to be the 53. I think, I'm not sure.
Wow. Awesome.
But yeah, I think unfortunately today, Dr. Bass cannot join us. But I think it's funny that you mentioned, and I guess we can go off a little bit on the topic that we discussing today. But when I first got to K-State, and I think it's a little of the story, January 2016, one of the things like really, impacted my professional career was seminar. And I don't know if because of you and all the, because at the time you were leading the seminar class, right, at K-State. So you were the one leading that. And I think when I first, obviously it was a little bit of a shock because like being not from the States, where my English is not my first language. So like presenting data, that is difficult, right? It's not easy to present data. We talk about stats and all that stuff. And then if you do it in a different language, yours, and makes it puts a little bit of a challenge to it. But I think I'm very, and that's one of the grad students that are listening to this podcast, when it was rough. Being the first year, getting that feedback and that stuff, like you have to improve in your communication skills. You have to improve in how you present data. And you don't think at that time that's going to help you along the way for your communicating. So I think that's one of the things that I appreciate a lot with all the Meat Science group. And I got my K-State shirt because I'm proud, but it was not easy. So I think it was, especially in the last 10-15 minutes for feedback. And I think it's this tough, but at the same time, it helps you grow. I don't know what you think of that. And now that you're not at K-State, you're in University of Georgia, I'm sure that you keep doing what you did at K-State. But I think it's like you don't see it as a student, but you see it as like when you graduate, right?
Yeah. That's really true that you say that, because I think for a while in the meats group, I was probably the least popular. Got invited to the least of y'all's parties. But I think ultimately, like I always tell people, the goal of, and Dr. O'Quinn really bought into this, and Dr. Hauser, Dr. Boyle, was really getting you guys to be good at analyzing data and being able to talk about your data when it's time to talk about it. And so that's always been a passion of mine, teaching that. And I think it's fun. I tell my students now, I do seminar in the fall. And so I do it much like we did for K-State. And so, I think the goal is to have you guys struggle at first and not really like, it be a painful negative experience, but for you to know, hey, I could have done better. And then ultimately, when you go to defend, whether it's your PhD or your master's, for you to give the best presentation you've ever given. And I really saw a lot of that in a lot of the students that we had graduating. Some of their coming into their defenses, I was like, we'll see how well they do at presenting their data. I was blown away by a lot of the efforts that people put in and a lot of the time they did on learning the process, I guess is what we'll call it, right? Kind of like a football analogies or whatever you want to say. And so yeah, it was a really great experience and something I love to do here at UGA, and so I do seminar in the spring and then or in the fall, excuse me, and then in the spring I do the scientific writing class, much like Dr. O'Quinn and I did there too. So and I'll tell you, I had my K-State stuff on earlier today when I was running pigs, but now they smell like pigs, so I'll leave them in the laundry for now.
Yeah, and I think just following up on that, and we talk here about beta agonists and some of the impact of beta agonists on meat quality, but generally the importance of using them in beef and pork production. So maybe you can expand on this topic, but we're gonna start from the known to the unknown. What is beta agonist? What does the industry use them for? And I think from there we can start looking at some of the meat quality traits and some of the effects that they have on meat.
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's probably something that. So I started at UF in 2005, and one of my first projects that I did was beta agonist. And I'll still remember the last beta agonist project that I did at K-State was right when you came in 2016. And then all of a sudden, and we'll get to this later on, when China dropped the ball and said no more beta agonists, we're not taking those pigs anymore, that kind of totally changed the use of beta agonists in at least the pork industry. And so it's been really kind of hard to really see a lot of to see the progression of beta agonists, because everything kind of just stopped there. At least is what the way the pork industry goes. Now we do still use them in cattle, and so to answer your question, what beta agonists are, they are compounds that we feed during the last, depending on species and dosage rate, but anywhere 28 to 42 days, if you're thinking about cattle, of feeding. And what they actually do is they repartition, and you'll also hear them being called repartitioning agents. And the reason they're called that is because they take nutrients that are supposed to go towards fat deposition. And so if we go and we think back to our growth curve, those of us that took growth class, whether it was good or bad for everybody, but that's another class I used to teach and that I dearly love to teach. But at the end of our growth curve, we're not putting on that much more muscle. But what we are putting on is fat. And granted, that's good if it's intramuscular fat in beef, because of course we get paid on that. And pigs, because they don't get paid on meat quality in that sense. As far as marbling is concerned, they have incentive to feed the beta agonist because it'll take the nutrients for fat deposition and redirect it back to muscle deposition. And so they'll get bigger muscles, bigger muscle fibers, and then these pigs have more lean on them. Same kind of concept for beef. They'll go and they'll feed it to them. It does injure kind of subcutaneous fat deposition and some marbling scores if you have a really aggressive feeding strategy. But for the most part, those producers will really want to feed the beta agonist when there's really like not a big difference in beef cattle for a choice select spread. Let's say they're pretty close to each other. Then that the market is signaling we just want meat, we want lean tissue. And so they'll feed the beta agonist to get more muscle versus the fat deposition and the marbling. And so, in pigs, it was around 1999 when ractopamine, which is the one that was approved for pigs, it's a beta-1 adrenergic agonist, so it works through the beta-1 receptor. And it was mainly sold by Elanco, and now it skips my mind, but there is a generic version on the market, which I'm sure all the other muscle biologists out there are screaming and saying they know what it is, but it just slips my mind at this point. And then for beef, we did for a certain time have two beta adrenergic agonists. We had sapatoral hydrochloride, which was a beta-2, and then we have ractopamine hydrochloride, which is a beta-1 adrenergic agonist. And so right now, because of some animal welfare concerns or well-being concerns, the zolpadrol is not being sold at this moment, but that leaves us with ractopamine, which the beef producers are still using now. What percentage, I don't really know at this point. It's not as much as it used to be, but there are still beef producers that are using ractopamine at the end of their feeding cycles.
Can you elaborate more on that? On why is not seed powder used? Do you know by chance why is it that the industry is not using it anymore? The seed powder?
So back in it's gonna slip my mind. Back I want to say 2013, I believe. We had a really hot summer, and a couple of the large packers noticed that they were having ambulatory movement problems with cattle that were fed zolpadrol. And one of the major problems that they saw was that hoofs started coming off of the animals. They call it hoof sloughing. And so those animals at that point wouldn't even get up. And as most of us know in the meat industry, an animal has to walk into the abattoir on its own in order to be harvested. And so because of that, they had to euthanize them in the pen. It became a huge animal welfare issue. And so, Merck being the stand-up company that they are, that makes zolpadrol, they voluntarily pulled it off the market so more research could be done. Their science, I would say, never 100% proved that zolpadrol was the main concern for what was seen in the industry. But there's a lot of theories thrown out there that we were growing these animals too quickly, and their body frames were not able to handle that. The physiology is not able to handle how fast they were growing. Because you'll see, on average daily gain, you get a 35% increase with zolpadrol, so really nice increase muscling, and you get a lot of heavy muscling with those animals. And so zolpadrol works awesome. And I hate to say it, I'm not trying to choose sides for which beta agonist is better than the other, but in cattle, the zolpadrol works a lot more efficiently than I would say the ractopamine does. And so they pulled it off for animal welfare concerns. And to this day, it's still approved for use in the U.S. by FDA, but they won't sell it to anybody just because of those concerns. And I think they're doing more research. And the other concern was that there were animals, much like you and I just talked about in our kind of talking to each other. When you dose animals in a pen and you want them to get, 8 milligrams per head per day or whatever it is, there will be some that overeat and there'll be some that undereat. And the hypothesis there was some of the animals were overeating the amount of zolpadrol, and that was causing problems with their connective tissue system. And so, once again, not that I've seen proven in the literature, but there's kind of a hypothesis that was thrown out there. And so ultimately, the beef industry and the pharmaceutical company did the stand up and hard decision of saying, we're going to pull it off the market and do some further research and make sure that the well-being of our animals comes first, which is really a big win for the beef industry.
Well, thank you for sharing this information. We're gonna go very quick to a break, and we'll be right back. And now during this break, I would like to invite one of my good friends up in Oregon, Rebecca from MPAN, the Niche Meat Processor Assistance Network. How are you, Rebecca?
I'm doing good. Thanks, Francisco.
Oh, thank you. It was a crazy year last year. A lot of movement and a lot of education that you guys provided last year, and that was successful. And this year, you guys are doing it again with this academy. I think it's good to be back. I'm glad to have you back on the podcast, and you can just tell us more about this academy that you guys putting together in late March, so we can have other folks that are interested in attending, so they can get more information.
Yeah, so it's called the Meat Processor Academy. It's a collaboration between NPAN, the American Association of Meat Processors, and a business consulting firm called Kitchen Table Consultants. So we've put together a 6-week virtual short course that's really designed for plants that are small to mid-scale, but want to grow, build their businesses, particularly their financials, their human resources, and operations. So we've really honed in on topics that are critical for growing meat processors and invited some really awesome guest speakers, including, some meat scientists, some really competent, experienced operators. And we're going to touch on 6 different subjects over those 6 weeks. And people can participate from the comfort of their home or their office. And we are enrolling people right now until March 21st, and the first class will be on the 22nd. But if people can't participate in the classes live, they all will be recorded and sent to them the next day.
Well, you guys heard it. You guys are interested in understanding more. I mean, this is more based on like as you said, the finance, the economics of to make it profitable, right? So this is a good opportunity to have experienced folks that have been on the business for many years, and we get together and visit about how to make the business profitable, basically. Before we kind of wrap it up, I like to get your perspective on what happened last year. From your perspective, I know a lot of new plans started, and we had. I know you can tell us a little bit of the numbers. I know you have them as far as how many head of a day of beef or pork they were killed. I mean, I don't know. I would like to know more from your perspective. I know that we have all the data that you have available from 2021. How was the small and mid-size operation for in the meat industry in general?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how many additional head they're processing, but I do know from surveys that they're processing about 15 to 20% more volume than they were pre-pandemic. And it's pretty incredible because most of them were not able to expand their workforce because there's no labor. So a lot of them did that by extending their hours, adding a Saturday shift. And some of them were able to make use of the CARES Act grant fund and some other grant funding to improve their equipment, so they're more efficient now. A lot have invested in like packaging technology to be more efficient there. And yeah, a lot of new plants also came online, which also expanded capacity. And there seems to be no end in sight for startups. We're getting contacted on a daily basis to help people apply for grants and get new facilities open. So it's kind of a heyday right now, and we're just trying to keep up. But I think this course will help, especially those startups as well, really, create viable businesses that hopefully will sustain into the future.
What are some of the funds available right now that maybe I start like wanting to look for those? Maybe you can provide some resource for them.
Yeah, so the phase 1 USDA Rural Development Meat Processor Expansion grants just came out. They're really designed for late stage projects. So folks who have already done all of their planning and just need that little bit of gap financing to get over the hump to build their new facilities or renovate their existing facilities. And then there'll be a second phase that comes out in the summer. It's unclear what it's going to look like, but it's probably going to be for smaller plants, smaller pots of funding, and cover a larger percentage of the project costs. And then USDA will also release the meat and poultry inspection readiness grants again, which they offered last year for the first time. And that's designed for custom exempt plants who want to go inspected. So whatever upgrades they need to make to their facility or food safety plans, that funding helps them kind of get over the hump there.
Perfect. And for folks interested, where can they find this information? Is that the MPAN website, or?
Definitely go to USDA Rural Development and type in meat processing or meat grants. But NPAN is available for technical assistance for folks who are wanting to apply for these grants. We're putting together a team of consultants that are launching next week with office hours, so folks can book a call with us and pick our brains and just ask questions about how to apply for these grants. We'll be ready and able to take on those inquiries. Yeah.
Nice. Well, thank you, Rebecca, for being here, and I'm sure you'll be hearing back from a lot of the processors listening to this podcast. Thank you a lot for joining us today.
Thank you.
I think what really stood out to me from this conversation is the effect of animal welfare and how animal welfare, with all those concerns from all those groups out there, like had an impact on the market, right? I mean, even though they maybe was not a scientific research like to back up, like, okay, this has happened, or this happened due to the overdose of Zipaterol, because from what I'm hearing, like there's no way to, it's just only an hypothesis, correct? Like there's no way you can tell if that was
Yes.
the reason.
Yeah,
But I don't
I've
know.
not seen any studies that say that.
Yeah, and I think that, and a lot of it that we see right now on the market is a lot of those drivers. I mean, they go off of the sustainability. Let's talk a little bit about meat quality.
Yep. Yeah, ultimately, long story short, and I'll probably end up giving you the long story, but beta agonists in general are, if fed aggressively, um, do not bode for favorable meat quality in terms of tenderness. You could also say, from the standpoint of juiciness too, and flavor, if you're talking about their ability to repartition nutrients away from fat deposition and to lean production. And so what you end up getting is kind of a very heavy leaned product, and then little fat, so you don't get any of the moisture in there. And so you could end up in some juiciness and flavor type problems in there. I spent the majority of my early career at K-State actually looking at beta agonist and implant strategies in cattle and in pork too, with the swine group at K-State, and looking at the effect on color and palatability in terms of tenderness. And so one of the things I would tell you and is the meat becomes tougher for one, I would say well proven theory or well proven mechanism, and that would be the way that the beta agonist works. And so what it does is it increases the enzyme that inhibits postmortem proteolysis. So the reason we age everything in a bag or age for a little while and we get a resolution of rigor is because of these enzymes, right? And so we actually increase the enzyme that inhibits those enzymes, and that's
Alpistatin.
how, yeah, calpastatin. So that's why you end up getting less calpain activity, and then you don't get any meat tenderization post mortem, or you get very little, or it's a slower rate. The other thing that I think occurs, and I've given a couple talks on this, is I think we're also creating a muscle fiber that's so big, especially in terms of, if you think about Sopaterol, we did a study on this, that it's so big that even if you do have postmortem proteolysis, there's either not enough enzyme there or enough time for those enzymes to actually break down that muscle fiber. So once again, like I said, the beta agonists are going to cause more meat to be produced or more lean muscle to be produced. And so the way that they do that is they increase the diameter or the size of the muscle fiber that's present in that animal, the cellular unit, right? And so the problem is you have that huge muscle fiber, and so it's trying postmortem. The calpain's got to go in there and break it down to cause meat tenderness, and it just doesn't happen. And so we had a nice correlation in our first study by Miss Sarah Ebarb that showed that the type 2X fibers, the largest fibers in the beef animal, had the most influence on, or not influence, that's a bad term, but were highly correlated um, to tenderness or decreases in tenderness as their sizes got bigger. And so really neat study that we ended up having there. And so I would say it's just really hard for those enzymes to break down those really big muscle fibers. And so I've spent a lot of time and we especially at K-State, I think you participated in some of those studies where we looked at the semitendinosis and different areas and muscle fiber size and how that affected tenderness values from more about your shear force standpoint.
what do you think that we can counteract like the effect of beta agonist on tenderness using other practices?
Yeah, one of the things that I've started to chase down here is the effect of muscle fiber number versus size and how that affects meat tenderness. So like when you're developing inside mom, and this is true for birds, and we mainly use in our models we use birds as our main model, but it's the same mechanism as what you see in mammals and beef and pork. But you either get one or you have one or the other happen. You either make a bunch of muscle fibers or you don't make many muscle fibers, and they're on average a lot bigger. And so if you make a whole bunch of muscle fibers, they're on average a lot smaller. And so one of our hypotheses is you would probably want to have the animal that makes a lot of muscle fibers that are on average smaller, because it'll be easier. Their muscle fibers when they're at mature weight should be smaller than the one that has smaller muscle fibers, or excuse me, bigger muscle fibers. And so that would tell us that, oh, maybe this smaller muscle fibers on average is going to be easier to bite through. It's kind of like, a wheel of cheese, or even like a little stick of cheese, right? If I take one of my kids eat this a lot, one of those sticks of cheese, and I'm sure your daughters eat that too, and you split it in half and you bite through it, that's a lot easier than if you kept that little stick of cheese together and then tried to bite through it. And it's double the diameter, right? And so we've been kind of trying to play around with that and see what effect number and size have to do with as far overall meat quality. So let's say if that was found to be true, and you want to use beta agonists, maybe you would say, well, if I know that I have the genetic capacity and my program that I use for gestation and feeding my mamas has has the ability to produce more smaller muscle fibers, then maybe it would be advantageous for me to actually feed a beta agonist or use growth promoting implants, because those fibers will get bigger, but they won't get gigantic. Because we've seen some which some of the older scientists would tell you it could be freezing artifact, which I agree with, but also I don't, because when you have freezing artifact on histology, it's a perfectly round fiber. But we'll get just regular shaped muscle fibers in our histology sections, especially pigs, that are 20,000 square microns, which the average is usually around 8 to 9,000. So you can get some really big muscle fibers that you see on the pictures. And so yeah, kind of looking at some of that stuff would be interesting and moving down the line.
So larger muscle fibers are tougher than small muscle fibers. And then maybe and it's one of the topics that it's very controversial, right? Because honestly, the meat industry, maybe not using zilpaterol, but we're using other beta agonists that somehow may have a similar effect, correct? But we talk about China, for example, they ban some of the beta agonists. Well, ractopamine side, correct? I don't know. Maybe you can tell us, and more going to that topic now. So if that's the case, if the bottom line of a beta agonist, they're gonna increase the size of the muscle fibers, why is it that we're using others out there? Or I don't know, maybe the rationale behind China banning some beta agonists.
Yeah, I think that's a tough question, and it's an interesting question, because sometimes I think politics has a little bit to play with it. You know what I mean? But part of it is, it's fear of the unknown, and is there residue in the meat, and can that affect my body, right? And that's a lot of people. And I just got done presenting to a Japanese community online last week, where they are very skeptical of any growth technology. Beta agonists are growth promoting implants if you talk about cattle. And I told them, I go, part of the reason I think that they're a little bit concerned about this is they're very steeped in tradition. And I got done listening to your Wagyu cattle podcast that you had. I think that was the last one you released. And listening to that gentleman, it's like, yeah, they're very steeped in doing things the old way and keeping the tradition, and not really, it's very hard for them to accept changes in technology, right? And so I think part of China, it could be politics, but then also it could be fear of the unknown, and they just believe that pigs should not be given a growth technology, and it's unnatural, and that's what they don't want. But it really did, just change the market in the U.S. because, it was 2016, 2015 when we were doing our last ractopamine study at K-State. And it was like the hammer came down and they said, we're not taking it anymore. The plants basically told us, we're not taking your pigs if they got any hint of ractopamine in there. And so you need to basically, at K-State, what we ended up doing was just removing all ractopamine. Even if we wanted to feed it to beef, we just took it all out of the feed mill just because you didn't want to have a positive on ractopamine. And so it really changed how people managed feed mills, how they managed their pigs. And so one of the things you got to look at that I find very interesting is a lot of people talk about sustainability, and that's $1 million word, and it means a billion different things. But, like I told the Japanese last week, I'm like, these technologies improve your sustainability. They reduce your footprint. They reduce the amount of time to market, the amount of inputs, the amount of water, which is a big thing in the U.S., especially where you're at right now.
Yeah, the conversion, right?
Yeah, so you get that really great conversion. And so it's like, man, you want to produce things in a sustainable manner, but you also at the same time are going to reject the things that can make you as efficient as possible. And so I'm not trying to sit on one side of the fence, but I sit back and think about it, and I'm like, if you do want to produce mass quantities amounts of food, and it's already been proven to be healthy and not have residues and not cause problems to the humans down the road that consume it, use them. They're there to be used, and they're 100% safe. And so I did get one gentleman out of the entire crowd of 100 Japanese that said he would eat more American beef because it's safe. So 1% I changed. So
yeah, no, and that was actually my next question on sustainability, right? You are by using this ingredient like beta agonist, you are getting more weight, you're getting more meat out of the carcass.
It's a little bit frustrating topic to think about in my mind, just because it's like, they want to do that, but they want to also reduce some of the technologies and some of the it's just written where it could not be as efficient as it could be. And so, and there's niche marketers that'll say, environmentally, and when I go to Spain, a lot of the producers that we go visit for our study abroad trips talk about being environmentally friendly. And their definition of that is their animals are raised outdoors. That's what they mean by that. They're not confined and all that. And it's like, yeah, that's true. But once again, you can never produce as much food as we do right now in our current systems that we have set up. And so,
absolutely, very efficient.
If you're gonna feed this population, you got to buy into that. Now, if that's your thing, and you want to have your thing be like, if you want to eat an animal that was raised outdoors and not given that stuff, that's great. I understand that, but being raised outdoors and not having growth promotants does not mean that it's more environmentally friendly, at least in my humble opinion.
Yeah, and for those meat processors that maybe, and we should have talked about this in the beginning, because they may be wondering what is a beta agonist. Like we do it like we say like that. So what are your thoughts on this misconception for hormones in beef?
Yeah, so with beta agonists, they're feed additive compounds that you put into the actual feed so the animal consumes it. You mix it in their total mixed ration, and then they eat it for the last 32 to 42 days. Now, if you talk about growth promoting implants in beef, we're taking little pellets of either estrogenic or androgenic compounds, so estrogen-based or testosterone-based compounds, put it in their ear because I don't know anybody that eats ears, but implant in their ears, and it slowly releases over time to give them the amount of hormone that they need to boost growth. And so yeah, and ultimately it's funny because we were at the beginning of a proprietary study at K-State where they were trying to develop a new compound. And you sit there and being an academic, you're like, oh, I want this done in like 2 years. 5 years is like long for me, I guess, in my mind. And they're like, yeah, this probably the time this gets approved by FDA and it goes through all the safety protocols and you prove that it doesn't cause any harm to the animal, number one, but then also anybody that eats offspring or anything else from it, or even eats the animal, that they won't have any issues. They're like, it'll be like 15, 20 years before that even gets approved. And so I don't think a lot of people understand the amount of rigor that it takes to get, compounds for feed additives approved. And like we're doing right now, where we're feeding basically vitamin B3, but it just has a different name. And eventually, if this product takes off, it's going to have to go through that process of 4 years, something like that,
with FDA
to be approved. Yeah, with FDA, and to be approved as an animal additive, even though it is approved for human consumption right now. And so it's just very interesting. And I don't think a lot of people understand the amount of rigor that goes into that, because it takes a long time, and that's something that I don't think I have the patience for sometimes.
Yeah, but just simply put, I mean, maybe the proportion of like in animal production in the United States that uses the estrogen based ingredient, like you said in the ear, versus the additive. So what is the main difference between the two?
Yeah, so I think so. Of course, you got to think about it for species wise. Species wise, I think what I used to hear was close to 90% of all pigs got rectopamine before the China thing hit the fan, and now you can't hardly find anybody that has anything that's fed a beta agonist in pigs. For beef, that's tough. I don't know what the actual percentage is. I would say there's still maybe a little bit over half that feed beta agonists. I could be totally wrong, so to take that with a grain of salt. But I would say most producers will use, in talking about beef, will use the implants at least once in their animal's life. Because if you think about it, and Dr. Susan Duckett at Clemson has done 2 different studies where that is probably the most efficient technology you can use as far as rate of return on your investment. And depending on what you look at, using one implant can based on, I think it's 2012 numbers, I want to believe, so it needs to be updated again. But she had estimated it was almost $200 rate of return on that for just buying a little implant. I think those are maybe 50 cents. I could be wrong on that.
Okay.
I usually have all the beef and the nutritionist buy all that stuff, so I'm just there to watch it get implanted. So, but anyway, so you think about that, and so most cattle at least once in their life will have implants, unless they're raised under natural organic type programs where they can't have any of that. But you think about that size of the market, it's very small, very small.
All right. Well, thank you a lot for joining us today. I think it was a lot of questions, and I mean through this conversation, and I hope that we solved some of the questions, because we got a couple questions from our listenership on ractopamine, growth promotants, and how they're used, and what some of the impacts on meat quality. Thank you a lot, Dr. Gonzalez, for joining us today, and I hope we made you at the first one, somewhere in the middle, maybe on the 100th, we'll get to talk about, I don't know, another thing. I know we have a good conversation that we need to talk on the NR studies that you're doing. So I think that's pretty cool data to show, and so hopefully we can get together and go over that soon.
Yep, and then once we get the bacon shaking rolling, that'll be a fun one to talk about too.
Yeah, absolutely. All right.
Maybe we can do a podcast from inside it while it's shaking us.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool, man. Well, thank you for asking me to be on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, and take care. We'll see you next time.
Okay, bye-bye.